citizens will allow or accept. So we've just gone through the experience of watching the Brexit process in the UK, where everybody thought up to the day of voting that Britain will stay within the European Union. And 24 hours later, they were out. And the new Prime Minister, well, the old Prime Minister had to say goodbye because he made the wrong call. And that might have been an interesting example of hubris, by the way. I won the election, I won the Scottish referendum, I'm definitely going to win this one. And the citizens went in a different direction. So the attitude, for example...
Could that be an example for this country, that a leader falls on his sword for perhaps not getting it right?
Well, it depends on the political culture that you generate in each country. So there's some interesting examples of leaving and coming back. But I think we must take personal responsibility and collective responsibility for any mistakes we make. A call on whether that responsibility that one takes leads to, back to your question, politics and economics. Every political leader would like to see economies growing at 4, 5, 6%. Every political leader would like to be able to reform their economies, restructure their political consensus. There's always winners and losers in change processes, and if the losers are powerful enough, or potential losers, generally their resistance disables one from taking the decisions that one needs to take. We're fairly young as a democracy. I think we have a little bit more space, but in our own country, vested interests are beginning to develop, and those vested interests determine whether you have the space to bring about changes or not. So let's take one concrete example: the OECD, the IMF, and others that has a highly concentrated, what they call, product market. Competition. There's oligopolies operating in many important sectors, including monopolies in sectors like energy as well. And one of the things that they ask of us as government and as a society is to open up the product market, create more competition, encourage the growth of more small and medium-sized businesses, because the past didn't allow us to do that. And it's something, even 22 years after democracy was initiated in South Africa, we haven't been able to get down to.
We've seen better numbers for second quarter GDP growth.
The direction of a recession. There's enough going on in our economy to keep us afloat just above zero. And the second quarter numbers gives us a lot more optimism that the next 2 quarters, they won't be 3.3%, but at least they will keep us afloat above zero, hopefully more towards 1%, but it depends on what we do as an economy. But we also are living on a continent that for the first time in years has a lower growth rate, 1.6%, than some of the advanced economies. The US, for example, is around 2% or so. Africa will grow above 3% next year, but this year is a bad year. And many of our manufactured exports were redirected from Europe undertaking a major transition from an export and investment path to a consumption path, and that means they are absorbing less raw materials, agricultural products from the rest of the world, which has had a major impact both on South Africa and on others as well. So that combination of factors, plus the potential decision from the U.S. to increase their interest rates, will introduce new volatility in our system as well. So there are lots of uncertainties around us that I think we need to take into account. Not everything is endogenous. There are exogenous factors as well.
One of the things you said now was that it will depend on what we do. A lot of commentators have been talking about a potential downgrade by the ratings agencies in September and up to December. What is your view? Are we doing the right things to get to that point, or are we out of the edge?
Well, from January this year, late January, we, as you know, began a process with Business and Labour work not only in the spirit but in the letter of the Constitution. Finance Management Act in the minute. That we are also responsible for procurement legislation through the Chief Procurement Officer and office. And all of these things require that whether you are a state-owned entity or a government department, these are the rules of the game. Follow the rules of the game. And if you follow the rules of the game, there's no need for any friction. And part of the rules of the game is that part of our job is to look after your money. Part of our job is to stand for an audience like this and say, your money is spent in an efficient way and in the public interest at the end of it all. And that's the job that we are trying to do. Now, if somebody becomes uncomfortable with us doing our job in terms of the letter of the law, then it's not our problem, it's their problem. Right? All we do, somebody must, if we reading the law incorrectly, we applying the law incorrectly, then prove us wrong. But if you're doing it the right way, and if that creates some discomfort on the other side, then they owe the public an explanation as to what's the discomfort about. So some of these events were initiated, I think, about 10 days ago, when, out of the blue, this firm, Tegeta, bottom of the front page of a business paper that's published in Johannesburg, but I'm sure read in Cape Town, has a headline, Tegeta warns Treasury, or something to that effect. Wow, so what are you warning us about? And the warning was about, don't you dare release this report into the coal contract. But why? What have you got to hide? Is a simple question. And on the other hand, there's a process in the Treasury where contracts, excuse me, and tenders above 10 million rands, to the extent that it is possible, are being reviewed to see, again, did we get value for money, and were public funds spent properly, and was the law and the right procedure followed as well. So there's any number of contracts we're looking at. This is one that has popped up in the public space. Mm. So let me sum up. There's the law that we are responsible for. We are acting in terms of the law. It will create discomfort in certain sectors. But if people have something to hide, they mustn't point an accusing finger to the Treasury and find excuses of one sort or another for refusal to hand over information or procrastinating on that particular issue. Just comply with the law, and all of us can get along as happy friends and have a drink. Non-alcoholic.
It's interesting to me that you just referred to the company Tegeta, which is owned by the Gupta family. Oak Bay Resources are referred to, which is owned by the Gupta family. We've spoken about an investigation into banks and collusion, and it's about the Gupta family. It seems as if the trail keeps on leading to one family. What is this about? You said yesterday in Parliament you're not captured, that we spend a lot of time on it, but everything seems to, what is going on with this one family that we are all talking about?
This is where you've got to earn your salary. And as an analyst, and say to the public, what do you read into this?
I'm here to ask the question. So what do you read into it, Minister?
No, well, I said in Parliament yesterday too. I mean, it's strange that this one, let's say, set of characters seem to have such omnipresence in our society and economy, and it's strange that should actually happen. But there's lots of news published in lots of media in one form or another, which makes allegations of one sort or another, or provides proof of one sort or another. I think what we do need in South Africa is to recognize that all economic systems produce rent-seeking phenomena of one kind or another. I'm sure there's some books on the other side of that wall which explain how these phenomena actually work. And clearly, in our society as well, you got very hardworking, honest people, and then you have what many books these days call extractors, people who unfairly and improperly benefit. Now, whether these people actually are doing it in that kind of way is for somebody to make a judgment call on at some stage. But what is far more important is that there are many people in government, the majority I believe, and outside, who want to see public funds utilized to benefit 55 million people, not 5. And that's the real story. How do we ensure on a day-to-day basis that those of us that are responsible for public finances make sure that that money benefits 55 million people? I think I might have mentioned yesterday that in the G20 meeting that took place on Sunday and Monday in China, where leaders of all of the G20 countries were present and our president was there as well, one of the remarkable concerns that's in the communique coming out from the G20 meeting and in the discourse both there and in various fora outside was particularly focused on the distrust between citizens and elites, be they business elites, banking elites, CEOs, politicians. And that's a common phenomenon, by the way, that's emerging throughout the world today. And the real issue that underpins that distrust or lack of trust is we talk about these GDP numbers that we were talking about earlier on. So the question that citizens are asking in many parts of the world is, okay, that number looks nice, but who benefits from that number? And how do I benefit from that number? And what is happening is that inequality is increasing, the appropriation of wealth by the top 1% to 10% versus the rest is highly disproportionate. And more importantly, citizens around the world, let alone South Africa, are alive to this. In other words, they understand what's going on, and they understand that they are losers in this process. Now, that's turned into a strong sentiment against globalization, for example, right? And global trade and global finance as well. And some would claim that we are now moving into reverse gear, meaning there's a process of deglobalization that's actually taking place, and that then leads to protectionism. It means putting up all sorts of barriers, and you can see it most graphically in relation to immigration at the end of the day. So what the question you're asking should be seen in this broader context. And what we need to ensure is that public-oriented bodies serve all the people in South Africa. And that's where the phrase, let us do our job. Our job is to implement the Constitution, to give effect to the legislation, and make sure all South Africans benefit, and create policy frameworks that enable them to all say, we have a stake in this economy and we have a stake in this country.
One last question. A lot of people are saying, well, Finance Minister Gordhan should subject himself to the law, go to the Hawks, and like everyone else, be questioned. Are you above the law?
No, you can arrest me now if you want to. But what have I done wrong? That's the question. So if you have malicious intent, then why must I subject myself to you? But above all, I think the public should know, I've taken legal advice. You've heard, sorry about this cough, you've heard Judge Crickler both write about this and talk about it outside the Hawks offices last week, that I'm not required to go there, firstly. Secondly, all the questions have been asked, all the questions have been answered. Thirdly, in every piece of correspondence of any substance between my lawyers and the Hawks and the prosecuting authority, there's a line there which says, should you require any more information, please contact us. They haven't yet. So they're welcome. If there's some piece of information they require, they're most welcome to ask, we'll give them the information. I don't have to be dragged through a cordon of press people or whatever it is just to show the world that, these hawks have got this chap here, which is what Judge Crickler is talking about in his article. So I'm not about the law. Nobody should be about the law. And I think that's the wrong narrative. The real question here is Tom Moyane, who's the head of the South African Revenue Service, laid a complaint sometime in 2014 or thereabouts with the Hawks. Since then, you've had a newspaper that carried an 18-month campaign against certain individuals. At the end of the 18-month period, that newspaper had to apologize in one whole page for what it had done, because it didn't have proof for some of the stuff that it was accusing people of. Some of you might remember reading both the front pages and the page where there was the apology. Then the newspaper began to take a different tack. So as we sit today, what's the problem? Who's accused of what? So there are people who might be stealing hundreds of millions of rands and getting away with it. And none of the people concerned in this particular matter have stolen a cent, as far as I know. Okay, so why does this proportional treatment? And what motivates it? You're not allowed any more questions. So these are my questions.
I'll take questions from the floor.
So we will certainly cooperate with whatever legal obligations we have. And I've got good legal advice. And I'm not just doing this as a women fancy. I'm doing it in accordance with the interpretation of the law.
I'll take questions now. I'll take the lady over there.
Hi, I'm Anne Crotty, fortunately from Business Day and not the other newspaper. I'm just wondering, do you feel that the corporate sector is doing enough currently? I mean, the focus seems to be entirely on the challenges and the problems and the weaknesses within the political sector. But I mean, is the corporate sector doing enough other than just kind of complaining? I'm thinking also about maybe tax issues and other constructive ways that they could contribute to South Africa.
Okay. I'll take a second question just to make it quick. The lady over there, I think red, over here. Yes. Is there a mic?
It's making its way to you.
Yeah.
I can see you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Claire Bissaka, Financial Mail. I'd like to ask the Minister whether he...
This is a press conference.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I couldn't see them. Yes, Claire?
I'd like to ask the Minister how confident he is that he will still be Finance Minister at the time of the budget next year. And also, just a second follow-up question. At the time of the MTBPS...
Will you still be employed by the Financial Mail?
And to what extent the Treasury is prepared to allow some fiscal slippage, or whether you're... Sorry, the question is whether the Treasury is prepared to accept any kind of fiscal slippage, or whether they are absolutely wed to the expenditure ceiling and their deficit targets, given the poor growth performance and also the pressures on spending.
I'm going to take one last question at the top there. The gentleman is standing now.
Thanks. I'm not a journalist, so you can relax, Pravin. Lawson Naidu here. One of your colleagues yesterday in Parliament announced that there would be an RFP for the potential nuclear deal shortly. The question I want to ask is your predecessor, actually not your predecessor, but your predecessor's predecessor, and your former successor, Mr. Nene.
Don't be nasty now.
In his medium-term budget policy statement last year, released I think around 200 million rands to the Department of Energy to do some studies regarding nuclear procurement. And my question is whether Treasury has seen the result of any of those studies that would justify the call for an RFP at this point in time.
Thank you. Minister?
let's start with the last one. The 200 million rands was to set up an office that would get into the procurement details, hire people who would be able to craft an RFP and so on. So that money was assigned to the Department of Energy so that they could do that. On the question of the RFP, there's a process, interdepartmental process, which is still incomplete. I saw the headlines today, but I don't think anything's going to happen until we have certain departments in agreement on what is required in terms of the law to get this process going. So, but nuclear, remember, is part of the energy mix. We have a nuclear power station not far from where we're sitting right now. And thirdly, when it comes to nuclear, the real issue is one of affordability and whether it will break the bank, so to speak. And we've said very clearly that while we have nuclear as part of the mix, that whatever venture we get into must be affordable at a particular point in time, and we must have the money to pay for whatever it is that we're committing ourselves to. So that still remains an important precondition for going forward. Claire, am I still going to be in the job next February? Depends on justice.
You can stay here all afternoon.
But I think you know the political rules of the game. And the political rules of the game is that we don't serve at our own pleasure. We serve at the pleasure of the President. And he may decide, yes, he requires the service of one or other minister, or he could decide and apply his own discretion to saying, well, I need to change one or other minister as well. So if I'm required to deliver the budget in February, I'll certainly be willing to do it. As far as fiscal slippage is concerned, I don't think as a country we can afford one right now, and largely because we aren't able to get growth going in our economy. We aren't able to yet demonstrate that we are in the throes of making some difficult choices about the difficult structural issues that we confront as a country. Although we're much better off, I think, given the kind of cooperation that we've been trying to generate over the last 6 months. But for now, I think we should stick to the fiscal commitments that we've made, because that's still within our control. How much you spend is within your control. You can then shape it in whatever way you like, but in the outer years we said we would get to a 2.4% deficit, and we should get there. We said we would taper off the debt, although we're still in the 47, 48% of GDP. And the denominator changes, the whole proportion changes as well, or the ratio changes. But the denominator is not changing, i.e. the size of the economy. And that ultimately determines where we go. So our debt has to be managed in the right way so that future generations can pay off what we've borrowed in the current generations and the generations before us. And your point about the corporate sector, I think that let me firstly give credit to the corporate sector. I think the work we've done on the ratings issue over the last 6 months, excellent. The small business fund that they've created of $1.5 billion of their own money, that's good progress. There's still more work that we're doing that we'll be able to report on to the President and Deputy President and the ratings agencies and investors as well, in relation to youth employment, in relation to support for small businesses and investment. So that's the good side. The work on university fees that Ms. Venkateswaran because there's lots of resources in South Africa that we are not utilizing. There will be those who will say, you know, these chaps are captured by monopoly capital and work for Rupert and this, but that's all part of a lousy political narrative that has no substance. I think it's far more important for us as South Africans to be able to rally all of the resources available to us, intellectual, innovation, and financial and other resources that we have in our country, leverage them in a way in which we could benefit the 55 million people, like I've said. So yes, I think we could probably have a lot more done and get a spirit of social solidarity to penetrate all elements of the corporate sector. Because unless we do that, unless the haves in South Africa make up their minds to share with the have-nots a lot more energetically and generously, so that over a 10-year period, we don't have youngsters walking the street unemployed and hopeless. Because and there are a substantial number of them. And you can see how easy it is to mobilize young people who either don't have the right education or training or sit on the margins, geographically speaking, and otherwise as well. And yet we have the capacity in South Africa to be able to incorporate them in a meaningful way, offer them exposure at work, offer them internships. And there is a group of this business sector we're working with that is specifically looking at this area. Now, if everybody in the corporate sector comes to the party, we would be able to absorb 1 million young people into one or other kind of, let's call it work exposure, per year. And that will change their lives forever. And we'll have a very different South Africa 5 years from now. But we need that single purpose to penetrate all of our minds.
I'm going to take a question here in front from the lady in black. And I will take this gentleman, and I'll take that gentleman at the back.
Thank you. I'm from UKZN, and we support your minister. My concern is the earlier question that we started with about violence on our campuses. I'm deeply troubled myself. But as you know, the students are captured by Fanon, and in many ways they still see the violence of the present democratic state. They still see the violence of poverty. They still see the violence of the slowness of change. And I'm wondering how we can address these concerns of students without just dismissing their violent reactions. I don't support the violence, but I understand the cry of students. We can't talk about massification and all the wonderful things we have in our policies for higher education and for school, at school level.
Thank you.
I understand all you've been saying, but we sit here as citizens and we see a government at war with itself. On one hand, you have a president who is suffering, who is hovering under a huge number of legal issues facing him. You're a man who's trying to maintain the economy, defend the rand, and do all the other things about equality and so on, which we all understand. Education, which the lady on my left has just spoken about. How, without leadership from the president, which is totally inevident at the moment, can we hope to do all these things that you talk about? It's simply not possible. So there must be something more. Why are you under such pressure, and from whom, and why? We hope you will be Minister of Finance at the next budget, but is it, how can you explain this pressure, and how are you going to deal with it?
A question from that gentleman at the back.
Werner Opperman, South African citizen. The question I have is regarding VAT.
You can't hear.
So, Werner Opperman, South African citizen. My question relates to VAT. Our current VAT categories are basically two categories, zero rated and rated 14%. Why don't we introduce a third category on luxury items of say 25%? That's a more fair tax system, where you immediately approach people to add additional more value to the economy or to the budget. And secondly, they can choose how to spend their tax money they contribute by not spending on luxury items. And finally, just by introducing this idea for discussion topic, we will force people to increase their purchasing power to buy items now before the tax, which will give us our economy quite a boost, at least for 4 or 5 months.
Just hold the mic a little closer, the second part of your question.
The second part is, if you just open up the topic of a third VAT category, people will try to preempt paying a tax, and it will accelerate their consumption by buying more cars, more houses now. And that will increase our economy, our GDP, for the next 2 to 3 months.
Do you want one more question? We've come to the very last round, so I'm going to take just one last question from up there. In the middle, the lady there. Yeah?
Claire from the Bookery. So we're in the business of books, Open Book Festival, talking about necessity, education, literacy. Why is there still VAT on books?
I've been given 1 more minute to take a question from the very, very top up there. I can't really see, but is there a mic there? One person?
Yeah. Thank you. And I'm Sandu asking you a question here. My question to you, Finance Minister, is there any possibility that tertiary education will become free in South Africa?
Thanks so much. That's that kind of question. So feel free to be as frank as you like, Minister.
I thought I was up to now. Free tertiary education is part of the policy brief and policy decision of the ANC. But like everything else, it's free when it can be afforded. So that's certainly an aspiration that we need to work towards. And we're still a society where millions of people still require decent housing, access to land, proper health services, better training facilities for young people. And so all one asks at this stage is that those of us that are in tertiary institutions become a little bit more mindful of the needs of other sectors of society, and that in any budgeting process, it's important that we are mindful of all the needs of all the people, because that's what budgeting is about. It's about saying you have limited resources. How do you spread those limited resources to meet all of the requirements that we have? And look, as a young democracy, we've done remarkably well for over the last 20 years. Look at any number, Institute of Race Relations, Goldman Sachs, Stats South Africa, in terms of improvement in the basics that people need for life, access to water, electricity, housing, health facilities, etc. We've done a remarkable job in 20 years that we can be very proud of as South Africans, and it's your tax money and our distribution of it that's made it possible. But we haven't reached the end of that road. We haven't improved the standard of living of everyone. So tertiary education and free tertiary education needs to be placed within that kind of context. But that's an aspiration that we have. On the VAT question, the idea of a, let's call it dual VAT system, is one that certainly we've debated for many years. But one of the things that South Africa is credited with internationally and by the IMF and so on is the simplicity of its VAT system. And simplicity is important because it contributes towards easier administration of VAT. And so the two zero-rated and non-zero-rated system that we have is applauded by everyone. Secondly, what we might have to do is to look at what is zero-rated at this point in time, because this was last done in 1991 or 92. Life has changed since then. And, but VAT, as you know, is a very sensitive issue, being a regressive tax as it is. Thirdly, introducing VAT on luxury, and additional VAT on luxury items is something that many countries in the world do. But then what happens is that the zero rating or the exemptions increase on the other side as well. But we haven't thrown the idea out completely, and thank you for sharing our pain for looking for additional money in the short term. But certainly a valuable set of ideas. Thank you very much for that. On the question of, from our colleague down here, a government that is at war with itself, yes, we have disagreements amongst ourselves on some issues. That's for everyone to see. But, by the way, anybody who pretends that in any family or group of more than 5 people or thereabout, that there's no disagreement, is really living in an artificial world. So I'm just going to give you this as a parallel, not as an excuse. So look at the British government of Cameron, where within the same cabinet you had the pro-Brexit and the anti-Brexit. And they went to war around that particular issue. They stabbed each other in the back. One won, one didn't win, etc., etc. So the good... Beg your pardon? Yeah, but I'm not talking about that. That I talked about earlier. I reminded you of that earlier, you see. So on the question of leadership, I take a much broader view. I think that, yes, the leadership from a president or a deputy president is important, and that when we reach critical points in our own set of circumstances, that kind of leadership matters. But the absence of a lead at a particular point in time doesn't mean the absence of action. There are many players in any society, and there are many players in government as well. So I don't have to, in my job, wait for a lead before I do what I have to do as well. So many things do get done, but I think we're very, very mindful of the point that you've raised. One can't dismiss that at all. And it's a set of circumstances that even within the ANC, you've heard the Secretary General admit, we've got problems. We have certain perception challenges, but factual challenges as well. And we need to reflect on what we are hearing from the public. We need to hear more. But more importantly, having heard, we need to change. And the question is, do we have the ability to change? And that's the test, I think, that we all face in the ANC over the next, say, 6 months or so as we go forward. But I think it's an important question that you raised. Fanon is certainly in fashion. Again, takes me back about 40-odd years. So I'll have to read that again. Now that somebody has started, what is it? Decolonization Institute. There's always lessons to be learned from the point that is being made, which is that the voices of different constituencies need to be more loudly articulated and more carefully heard and absorbed, and within new paradigms and changed paradigms if need be, so that we can actually find better responses and hear each other better. Because we can all excruciate about all of this. The question is not to excruciate. The question is, how do we collaborate to create a different world, a different environment, and meaningfully respond to cries for help, cries for changes, but also become part of the processes of change at the end of the day. But we don't want, I think, a situation where one side sits passively and the other side must bring all the changes. Let's all begin to ask the question, or recognize, and this certainly struck me at the G20 meeting, where President Xi Jinping of China took a very interesting line on innovation and science being drivers of development in the next 10, 20 years, which is a completely different angle to what we normally talk about in this kind of context. So let me end by saying that we probably are living through quite a historic period, both in South Africa and in the world. There are lots of things that are changing. For example, technology is going to wipe out jobs in the next 10 to 20 years, as we normally understand it. In terms of the past, at most, I see of us here come from. And those sorts of challenges are going to require new paradigms, new ways of thinking, new ideas, and above all, new practices as well. We need to create the right sort of collaboration amongst ourselves and understanding, which will enable us to build the synergies that we require to create a better future for all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Just a couple of things from my side. Thanks, everyone, for joining us this evening. I do want to say a very, very special thank you to Leopards Leap, our headline sponsors who make this festival possible. This is one and only festival this year. You won't be able to catch him again, but you will be able to catch Justice Malala in 3 more events. Working very hard in the next couple of days.